What's going on with this huge rise from $20 way up into the hundreds and then a precipitous fall yesterday?
Well, let's remember that until yesterday, most people around the world never heard of Bitcoin. Bitcoin, for those who don't know it, is basically virtual currency, the same that you get for blasting aliens in a video game, except now traded globally. You can buy Bitcoins with virtually any currency on Earth, and convert back into any currency, or buy goods and services with it.
We talked about the story. What really got us talking about Bitcoin was the guy in Edmonton who was selling his house for the first time, wanted $400,000 in Bitcoins.
So I think the best way to look at this is a proxy for the mistrust individuals have of central bankers. If you're willing to take Bitcoin as a currency, a virtual Barbie currency to me, it has no basis, no central banker, no hard asset behind it. But if you don't trust any other currency, this is where you go. So it's essentially what's happening here, Heather. People all around the world are saying, I've had it with my central banker. I don't trust politicians anymore. I'm going to trade with this currency with my computer and my cell phone.
Well, they did that. The reason the Bitcoin shot up was after Cyprus, when they thought the government was going to get their hands on the money in the banks. So people turned to Bitcoins to keep them protected.
So I ignore everything till it gets to $1 billion of market cap. Okay. That happened recently with Bitcoin, well over $1 billion in value. So it's here to stay. When you've accumulated a virtual worth of $1 billion and people are willing to trade it and actually buy things with it, turn it back into hard assets. And here's the key, Heather. Owners of hard assets are willing to take Bitcoin. This is here to stay. That's what's going to happen. And no central bank can control it.
You just called it a Barbie currency. I was going to say, is it all hocus pocus? I mean, is it a legitimate form of currency to trade?
It is. And as soon as it passed $1 billion and someone bought a hard asset with it in my books as an investor, it became real. Now, at the same time, because relative to all other currencies, it's tiny. $1 billion is irrelevant in the currency market. Remember, the currency markets are the largest markets on Earth, bigger than commodities, bigger than stocks, bigger than bonds. It's going to grow, but it's going to take a long time. But the key is volatility. Nobody's going to put a large part of their net worth into this thing because it can go up and down 60% in a day, as we saw yesterday. But is it here to stay? Oh, yeah. So will I take 2 or 3% in Bitcoins? I think I might. I'm going to start looking at it.
Are you really? I was going to say, are you into this at all?
I have a basket of currencies, Heather. The way you diversify your risk in currencies is to own many of them. I own euros, I own Swiss francs, I own Canadian dollars, American dollars. And I might start to dabble, a little dabble-dooey in Bitcoin.
That's exactly what I was going to say. All right, thank you for the primer. Kevin O'Leary, our business commentator, the chair of O'Leary Funds. Thanks, Kevin.
Commissioner, Mr. President, I rise again, I'm afraid, to make the same old hoary speech that I've been making here for several years. And that is, it is my opinion that you do not really understand the concept of banking. All the banks are broke. Bank Santander, Deutsche Bank, Royal Bank of Scotland, they're all broke. And why are they broke? It isn't an act of God. It isn't some sort of tsunami. They're broke because we have a system called fractional reserve banking, which means that banks can lend money that they don't actually have. It's a criminal scandal, and it's been going on for too long. To add to that problem, you have moral hazard, a very significant moral hazard from the political sphere. And most of the problem starts in politics and central banks, which are part of the same political system. We have counterfeiting, sometimes called quantitative easing, but counterfeiting by any other name. The artificial printing of money, which if any ordinary person did, they'd go to prison for a very long time. And yet governments and central banks do it all the time. Central banks repress the amount of interest that rates are, so we don't have the real cost of money. And yet we blame the real retail banks for manipulating LIBOR. The sheer effrontery of this is quite astonishing. It's central banks. It's central banks that manipulate interest rates, Commissioner. And plus, underneath all this, we talk loosely, in a rather cavalier fashion, do we not, about deposit guarantees. So when banks go broke through their own incompetence and chicanery, the taxpayer picks up the tab. It's theft from the taxpayer. And until we start sending bankers, and I include central bankers and politicians, to prison for this outrage, it will continue.
Well, we're going to be negative for a long time. You better own equities, or you better own something other than debt. I mean, it's remarkable what's happened in the last 10 years. I've been wrong in thinking that you could really have the developments you've had without inflation taking hold. But we have 120 odd billion. Well, we have some almost very high percentage in treasury bills, some in other, and some just in cash. But those treasury bills are paying us virtually nothing. Now, they're a terrible investment over time, but they are the one thing that when opportunity arises, it will arise at a time, and maybe the only thing you can look to pay for those opportunities is the treasury bills you have. I mean, the rest of the world may have stopped. And we also need them to be sure that we can pay the liabilities we have in terms of policyholders over time, and we take that very seriously. So if the world turns into a world where you can issue more and more money and have negative interest rates over time, I'd have to see it to believe it, but I've seen a little bit of it. I've been surprised, so I've been wrong so far. I do not think that, I don't see how you can create, I would say this, if you can have negative interest rates and pour out money and incur more and more debt relative to productive capacity, you'd think the world would have discovered it in the first couple thousand years rather than just coming on it now. But we will see. It's probably the most interesting question I've ever seen in economics. Can you keep doing what we're doing now? And we've been able to do it. The world's been able to do it for now a dozen years or so. But we may be facing a period where we're testing that hypothesis that you can continue it with a lot more force than we've tested it before.
I'd like to get rid of the Federal Reserve too. I would like to have money controlled by a computer. However, that's not what's happening, and I'm a realist. You're going to have a Federal Reserve System, and therefore it's relevant to ask, given that there is a Federal Reserve System, even though it would be a better world if we could get rid of them, how should Federal Reserve operate?
Simply flooded the system with money.
Yes, we did. That's another way to think about it. We did.
Where does it come from? Do you just print it?
We print it digitally. So we, as a central bank, we have the ability to create money digitally. And we do that by buying treasury bills or bonds or other government guaranteed securities. And that actually increases the money supply. We also print actual currency, and we distribute that to the Federal Reserve Bank.
That part away? A person who really understands the fun of cars?
What about an attack?
An attack? What kind of attack?
You think about you pull out your debit card, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, no one's debit card works.
Oh, yeah, right? What's going to stop that from happening? What do you do with no money?
Because there's only 3% that's real cash. That's real, palpable.
So if everybody wanted all the paper for all the money they have in the bank, we would never be able to do it.
If everybody's debit card stopped working, it would fucking...
How much cash is there out there, right?
I have no idea.
But how much cash is there out there now in comparison to the 80s when there was only cash?
It's probably the same amount. It's probably the same amount.
But most people use credit cards now, right? Way more.
Yeah, but think about if we had an enemy that wanted to say,
No
or
cash.
even our own government, that's just all technology, monetary wise, is cut off.
Yeah, they just killed the system. They just stopped it all. No more banks, no more banking, no more ATMs.
What are you gonna do?
You don't have any money.
Nobody has any money. You can't buy food. You can't buy anything. So you have to steal, and then
all your money
everything.
is locked up.
Chairman Crapo, Ranking Member Brown, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Peter Van Valkenburg, and I'm the Director of Research at Coin Center. an independent nonprofit focused on the public policy issues affecting cryptocurrency and public blockchain networks. What is Bitcoin? Bitcoin is the world's first cryptocurrency, and it works because of the world's first public blockchain network. What does Bitcoin do? It's simple. It lets you send and receive value to and from anyone in the world using nothing more than a computer and an internet connection. Now, why is it revolutionary? Because unlike every other tool for sending money over the internet, it works without the need to trust a middleman. The lack of any corporation in between means that Bitcoin is the world's first public digital payments infrastructure. And by public, I simply mean available to all and not owned by any single entity. Now, we have public infrastructure for information, for websites, for email. It's called the internet. But the only public payments infrastructure that we have is cash, as in paper money, and it only works in face-to-face transactions. Before Bitcoin, if you wanted to pay someone remotely over the phone or the internet, then you could not use public infrastructure. You would rely on a private bank to open their books and add a ledger entry that debits you and credits the person you're paying. And if you both don't use the same bank, well, then there'll be multiple banks and multiple ledger entries in between. With Bitcoin, the ledger is the public blockchain, and anyone can add an entry to that ledger, transferring their Bitcoins to someone else. And anyone, regardless of their nationality, race, religion, gender, sex, or creditworthiness, can for absolutely no cost create a Bitcoin address in order to receive payments digitally. Bitcoin is the world's first globally accessible public money. Is it perfect? No. Neither was email when it was invented in 1972. Bitcoin's not the best money on every margin. It's not yet accepted everywhere. It's not used often to quote prices, and it's not always a stable store of value. But it is working, and the mere fact that it works without trusted intermediaries is amazing. It's a computer science breakthrough, and it will be as significant for freedom, prosperity, and human flourishing as the birth of the internet.
So children being born today will not use paper or metal money. We have to think about what kind of cashless society do you want to live in? Do you want your children to live in? Think about when you buy something from a corner store with cash. The merchant does not know your name, your address, what the last thing you bought, maybe what you're most likely to buy next. And you know what? They didn't need to know any of that. That was fine. But now this is being taken away from us by corporations and governments who insist that for our security, they need to know everything about us. I think this is nonsense, and I think we need to fight back. And thankfully, about a decade ago, some group of people came up with a way out. If you look at the evolution of money from when we used to have a barter system through shells, through precious metals stamped with king's faces on them, to paper money, now to credit cards and mobile payments, someone created another way to have a money system without a central authority, and that is Bitcoin. We think about the way digital payments work today, and again, all payments will be digital. There's a third party in the middle, whether it's Visa, Venmo, PayPal, WeChat. Someone in the middle can freeze your transaction, confiscate your funds, surveil and spy on you. With Bitcoin, your transaction is completely peer-to-peer. The payment processing is done by a decentralized global competition and not by an entity.
The last 6 months have been weird for all of us. And we watched this incredible run-up in the price, and it dominated the conversation. Now, if you've been in this space for a while, this isn't new to you, right? You've seen this happen. This is maybe the 6th, 7th, maybe 8th big bubble-like behavior where you see this massive increase in price. And we've seen it before. I remember at some point in October, I started getting calls from journalists, and they asked me to comment on this. And they would ask in a very kind of cagey way, so what do you think? Could this possibly be a bubble? I was like, of course it's a bubble. We're living in the era of the everything bubble. But really, it's not the Bitcoin bubble you should be worried about that everybody is very aware of. I'd be more worried about the subprime auto loan bubble, the stock bubble, the bond bubble, the real estate bubble, the student loan bubble, the debt bubble, the foreign exchange bubble, the FANG bubble, the tech bubble, the everything bubble. I think many of you have probably had this experience. You come into this space, you don't know what's going on. It's all very, very weird and complicated and difficult to understand. You find someone who can explain some detail to you, and you start barely understanding some of the things around you. And then you suddenly realize that even though you are quite aware you don't know what the hell is going on in this Bitcoin space, or in the related space, the entire cryptocurrency space, to everyone you know, you're the expert. And they come to you and they go, you know about Bitcoin. Should I invest in IOTA? Or, you know about Bitcoin, is this a good time to get in? And maybe you told them when the price was, I don't know, 200, and they ignored you because they thought it was silly internet money. But the morning that it hits 19,000, they call you up and they go, is this a good time to get in? And depending on whether they're a good friend, in which case you say, hell no, wait, or they're that douchebag who bullied you in high school, in which case you're like, yeah, now's the time to get in, Chad. You wouldn't do that, of course. Everyone in this theater is wonderful. We wouldn't do that. But the best part, after you told them to get in at 200 and they ignored you and they called you up at 19,000, in January and February, you start getting the calls, I know you've had them, where someone calls you up and they go, are you okay? I saw on CNBC that Bitcoin crashed. It's destroyed, it's gone, it's down in the doldrums, it's a mess. Are you okay? Now, let's not minimize the fact that a lot of people who did get in at 19,000, probably in a very ill-advised way, are hurting. And that's not funny. That's bad investment decisions, and you should be very, very careful. These things are extremely volatile, but it is extremely ironic when people call you up and they go, are you okay? Because we heard it crashed a year ago. We were just over 1,000. So price-wise, we're up a cool 800%. So your answer should probably be, you're in S&P index funds. Are you okay? Because the day I start hearing about your investment on TV, you won't be okay. Nobody will be okay. And so you see, even my talk here, dominated by price, not something you hear me talk about a lot, but it's apropos, it's the times we're in. And then suddenly, the price tanks, the meetups start getting roomy again, the phone calls stop, some people start laughing at you again, because they're like, I told you it was crazy magic internet money that would crash. And the cycle repeats. You guys like farmers markets? Anybody here like farmers market? If you go to a farmers market this weekend, they're going to have two things: rhubarb and pumpkins. Because it's winter. And you're not going to find a great array of beautiful organic vegetables. Those come from Mexico at this time of the year. The farmers, the local farmers market, all they can deliver at this time of year is rhubarb. And in a great analogy to the economic situation we're in, if you went to the farmer's market right now and noticed it's not very popular and there aren't too many people there, you might go, huh, farming is dead. I knew it. I saw it on CNBC.
Now, let me just basically say how impressed I am with Ethereum, full stop, period. And that when I think about this as a regulator, I think of it almost analogized to email versus the internet. If Bitcoin is email, a one-trick pony, so to speak, but obviously revolutionary, Ethereum goes far beyond that. It's more like the internet.
The stock market, you say it always goes up? It's like that 45-degree angle. Correct. Since 1971, direct 45-degree angle, a couple of drops, whatever, goes straight up. That's because it's denominated in dollars. They're just devaluing the dollar, right? Stocks go up. If you denominate that same stock market in gold, the stock market is down since 1970. The stock market is a complete scam in terms of accruing value. It's all the dollar being devalued. So it goes straight up 45-degree angle, but if you denominate it in ounces of gold, it's down. Okay. So, well, here's why it's important.
Buying gold.
No, here's why it's important. You bought a house, right? In where?
A lot of places.
Nantucket?
Yeah, I have one there, yes.
Okay. Why'd you buy that house in Nantucket?
I love that place.
Okay.
I love it. That's not something I was trying to get. Like, I thought I lived there the rest of my life.
Okay. And there wasn't that many to select from, right?
Yes.
Okay. And because there's not that many, the prices are expensive, and you have a lot of money, so you could buy it.
Right, yes.
Okay. Same thing in the digital world is there's some things that are just scarce. And if those things end up having a large community that wants them, what ends up happening? The price doesn't go up. Correct. Okay. So Bitcoin's only got 21 million, obviously. And the whole thing behind it is the strongest computing power in the world. So literally the computer network that runs Bitcoin is stronger than anything in the world. No government, nobody can hack it because it is the strongest computing network in the world. It's got more computing power on it than anything else. So rather than the government saying, hey, today we're going to print more money, or remember what happened today with Penn, where they just all of a sudden, all these new shares, right? Yep. You're like, fuck, what the hell? Like, I had no say in this.
Right.
That's basically what the Federal Reserve does. So earlier this year, they printed $3+ trillion. You didn't get a vote, I didn't get a vote. It's fuck, okay. Whatever cash you have is going to be worth less next year, right? Because the purchasing power goes down. And so what ends up happening is you're financially incentivized to get out of the dollar and buy stocks, buy gold, buy fucking property, whatever. But with Bitcoin, they can't do that. The reason why it becomes so valuable is because nobody can fuck with it. And that's why the Bitcoiners are so rabid about it, is they're just like, look, it doesn't matter what anybody says, what you think, I think, anybody. Nobody can fuck with it.
I'm a baby boomer. I was born just after the war. We've probably had the longest period of peace and prosperity globally, I would say, from that time. I've put a little bit of modest money away so I can hand something down to my family when I pass on, largely because I've never spent more money than I've earned, and I've been prudent, and I've worked moderately hard. Now, it always seems to me as a complete surprise to politicians how countries get in debt. Let me explain, because I don't think you really understand it. It's because politicians consistently spend more money than they raise in taxation, more money than they can possibly raise in taxation, most of which, in point of fact, they actually waste. The reason we're talking about countries which are broke, and they are broke, is because they're ridiculous, ineffective, ignorant politicians consistently spend more money than they can raise. And then they borrow. And they borrow. And worse, they then print money because politicians and their central banks have a machine which prints money. You do that as a private citizen, and it's a criminal offence. You would go to prison for doing that, and politicians and their central banks do it all the time. let me explain to you that these countries are broke. And they're broke because of their own stupid leadership and politicians. And it's immoral to ask ordinary taxpayers of any country to pick up the tab for failed politicians and failed banks. They are defaulted, they're broke. For God's sake, let's all of us admit it.
Institutional buy-in, at least intellectually, but do you still not have to ask the question why? What problem is it solving that other assets or currencies or commodities can't?
Listen, it's scarcity. It is as old as the first currencies. You know, how do I store my value? And people are worried that our governments, who have printed more and more and more fiat, are less trustworthy, right? You see what happened in places like Zimbabwe or Weimar Germany. There's 100 examples of currencies governments debasing their currency to oblivion. But even, you know, something like, you know, the pound sterling, right? Like, if you think about it, the pound sterling used to buy you a pound of sterling, and now it buys you about this much sterling. And so there's been this long debasement even of a stable currency. And so people are going to Bitcoin because there are 21 million Bitcoins that'll never be mined. There's a complete scarcity in it. People believe it's a store of value, right? It's a social construct, and you can't change that.
So let me ask you though about that correlation, because with risk on, people are taking more bets on things like Bitcoin. But how much of that is a bet on Bitcoin or the issues around just printing cash versus the operational potential as a transactional currency, given the news we just heard from PayPal that PayPal is going to allow cryptocurrencies as part of the wallet? How does that change this?
I think that's, you know, in some ways the shot heard around the world on Wall Street, right? PayPal has 346 million accounts, right? They're the 30th biggest bank in the U.S. in deposits. And all of a sudden, every financial institution says, wait a minute, what am I doing? And so if you're in the boardroom of Morgan Stanley or Goldman Sachs or Bank of America, you're thinking, how do I get engaged? I was looking before I came on at just stock prices, right? Ethereum, the platform that this new financial ecosystem is going to be built on, is up 200% this year. Square app, 186%. PayPal, 99%. And then you go to Wells Fargo, down 60. Citibank, down 46. And so if you're a CEO of a big bank, you're saying, well, hold on, what's going on here? And so we are going to see over the next 10 years a rebuilding of the financial infrastructure of this country. It was interesting that PayPal hired Paxos to do their integration with crypto, because there's a domain expertise in this cryptocurrency space, in this blockchain space that's needed. When I lived in Alabama, I was a helicopter pilot. There was a town called Enterprise, and they had a statue that held up a boll weevil. And I was like, the craziest statue I've ever seen. Well, the boll weevil ate all the cotton, and then they planted peanuts, and that brought prosperity to the region. In some way, the cryptocurrency community is going to hold up a virus, the COVID virus, because it was the COVID virus that really accelerated, as horrible as that sounds, accelerated adoption of crypto on two ways. The macro story with Bitcoin, and the more maybe important story of digitalization of all cash, digitalization of the financial services system. That's going to mostly be built on Ethereum.
Bitcoin is the central bank of cyberspace. It's the central bank, except it's the fair central bank that respects the laws of thermodynamics and the conservation of energy, and it's never going to screw you. And there's no one that's ever going to change the rules on you.
We are still in the review and consideration stage, but we've just launched a public consultation so that consumers and Europeans can actually express their preference and tell us whether they would be happy to use a digital euro just in the way they use a euro coin or a euro banknote, knowing that it is central bank money that is available and that they can rely upon.
Bitcoin is the world's first cryptocurrency, and it works because of the world's first public blockchain network. What does Bitcoin do? It's simple. It lets you send and receive value to and from anyone in the world using nothing more than a computer and an internet connection. Now, why is it revolutionary? Because unlike every other tool for sending money over the internet, it works without the need to trust a middleman. The lack of any corporation in between means that Bitcoin is the world's first public digital payments infrastructure. And by public, I simply mean available to all and not owned by any single entity. Now, we have public infrastructure for information, for websites, for email. It's called the internet. But the only public payments infrastructure that we have is cash, as in paper money. And it only works in face-to-face transactions. Before Bitcoin, if you wanted to pay someone remotely over the phone or the internet, then you could not use public infrastructure. You would rely on a private bank to open their books and add a ledger entry that debits you and credits the person you're paying. And if you both don't use the same bank, well, then there'll be multiple banks and multiple ledger entries in between. With Bitcoin, the ledger is the public blockchain, and anyone can add an entry to that ledger, transferring their Bitcoins to someone else. And anyone, regardless of their nationality, race, religion, gender, sex, or creditworthiness, can for absolutely no cost create a Bitcoin address in order to receive payments digitally. Bitcoin is the world's first globally accessible public money. Is it perfect? No. Neither was email when it was invented in 1972. Bitcoin's not the best money on every margin. It's not yet accepted everywhere. It's not used often to quote prices, and it's not always a stable store of value. But it is working, and the mere fact that
Bitcoin is the central bank of cyberspace. It's the central bank, except it's the fair central bank that respects the laws of thermodynamics and the conservation of energy, and it's never going to screw you. And there's no one that's ever going to change the rules on you.
I'm a bit of a dinosaur, but I have warmed up to the fact that Bitcoin could be an asset class that has a lot of attraction to it as a store of value to both millennials and the new West Coast money. And as you know, they got a lot of it. It's been around for 13 years, and with each passing day, it picks up more of its stabilization of brands. So I own many more times gold than I own Bitcoin. But frankly, if the gold bet works, the Bitcoin bet will probably work better because it's thinner and more liquid and has a lot more beta to it.
Institutional buy-in, at least intellectually, but do you still not have to ask the question why? What problem is it solving that other assets or currencies or commodities can't?
Yeah, listen, it's scarcity. It is as old as the first currencies. You know, how do I store my value? And people are worried that our governments, who have printed more and more fiat, are less trustworthy, right? You see what happened in places like Zimbabwe or Weimar Germany. There's 100 examples of currencies governments debasing their currency to oblivion. But even, something like, the pound sterling, right? Like, if you think about the pound sterling used to buy you a pound of sterling, and now it buys you about this much sterling. And so there's been this long debasement even of a stable currency. And so people are going to Bitcoin because there are 21 million Bitcoins that'll ever be mined. There's a complete scarcity in it. People believe it's a store of value, right? It's a social construct, and you can't change that.
So let me ask you though about that correlation, because with risk on, people are taking more bets on things like Bitcoin. But how much of that is a bet on Bitcoin or the issues around just printing cash versus the operational potential as a transactional currency, given the news we just heard from PayPal that PayPal is going to allow cryptocurrencies as part of the wallet. How does that change this?
I think that's, in some ways the shot heard around the world on Wall Street, right? PayPal has 346 million accounts, right? They're the 30th biggest bank in the U.S. in deposits. And all of a sudden, every financial institution says, wait a minute, what am I doing? And so if you're at the boardroom of Morgan Stanley or Goldman Sachs or Bank of America, you're thinking, how do I get engaged? I was looking before I came on at just stock prices, right? Ethereum, the platform that this new financial ecosystem is going to be built on, is up 200% this year. Square app, 186%. PayPal, 99%. And then you go to Wells Fargo, down 60. Citibank, down 46. And so if you're a CEO of a big bank, you're saying, well, hold on, what's going on here? And so we are going to see over the next 10 years a rebuilding of the financial infrastructure of this country. It was interesting that PayPal hired Paxos to do their integration with crypto, because there's a domain expertise in this cryptocurrency space, in this blockchain space that's needed. When I lived in Alabama, I was a helicopter pilot. There was a town called Enterprise, and they had a statue that held up a boll weevil. And I was like, the craziest statue I've ever seen. Well, the boll weevil ate all the cotton, and then they planted peanuts, and that brought prosperity to the region. In some way, the cryptocurrency community is going to hold up a virus, the COVID virus, because it was the COVID virus that really accelerated, as horrible as that to sound, accelerated adoption of crypto on two ways. The macro story with Bitcoin, and the more maybe important story of digitalization of all cash, digitalization of the financial services system. That's going to mostly be built on Ethereum.
Senator-elect, you got another first under your belt. This one very interesting. You're the first senator to own Bitcoin. I'm going to be fully transparent here and say I'm not well versed in Bitcoin, but I know that there are a couple people who believe, yes, you should be an advocate for this type of currency, and that there are other people who are raising some concerns that this could be a front for money laundering or for some sort of tax evasion. Where do you stand? Do you hope to bring Bitcoin into the national conversation?
I do hope to bring Bitcoin into the national conversation. I'm a former state treasurer, and I invested our state's permanent funds. So I was always looking for a good store of value, and Bitcoin fits that bill. Our own currency inflates. Bitcoin does not. It's 21 million Bitcoin will be mined, and that's it. It is a finite supply. So I have confidence that this is going to be an important player in stores of value for a long time to come.
Well, we are more well-versed now after that answer. And
Senator-elect, you got another first under your belt. This one very interesting. You're the first senator to own Bitcoin. I'm going to be fully transparent here and say I'm not well-versed in Bitcoin, but I know that there are a couple people who believe, yes, you should be an advocate for this type of currency, and there are other people who are raising some concerns that this could be a front for money laundering or for some sort of tax evasion. Where do you stand? Do you hope to bring Bitcoin into the national conversation?
I do hope to bring Bitcoin into the national conversation. I'm a former state treasurer, and I invested our state's permanent funds. So I was always looking for a good store of value, and Bitcoin fits that bill. Our own currency inflates. Bitcoin does not. It's 21 million Bitcoin will be mined, and that's it. It is a finite supply. So I have confidence that this is going to be an important player in stores of value for a long time to come.
well, we are more well-versed now after that answer. And
I'm a bit of a dinosaur, but I have warmed up to the fact that Bitcoin could be an asset class that has a lot of attraction to it as a store of value to both millennials and the new West Coast money. And as you know, they've got a lot of it. It's been around for 13 years, and with each passing day, it picks up more of its stabilization of a brand. So I own many more times gold than I own Bitcoin. But frankly, if the gold bet works, the Bitcoin bet will probably work better because it's thinner and more liquid and has a lot more beta to it.
And his newest book just came out 8 days ago, called The Internet of Money, which is a masterpiece to read. Please help me welcome Andreas Antonopoulos.
Good morning, everyone.
Do online shopping, use Visa,
This is why
American Express.
Silicon Valley is competing with the U.S. with the Federal Reserve to be your bank. Everybody wants to be your bank. Everybody wants to, because that's when they control you. But that's also when you get loans at negative interest rate, so they actually pay you to take the loan, which you can pay off your student loan. This is going to be.
You're scaring the fuck out of me.
No. This is what you wanted. You wanted universal basic income. Here it comes. This is going to, and by the way, it's going to work. This is the crazy thing. Now the control will also work, but the economy will be steerable, and I think that part will really work. But let me tell you, the apocalypse is coming, and you're going to need a Bitcoin. At least one.
Are you a Bitcoin salesman?
No,
Curry?
no.
Did I get...
I was very anti-Bitcoin.
Really?
I was very anti-Bitcoin until I sold a shitload of them at like $900, and I could have really
made a lot of money.
Yeah, I got them for nothing. I got them. People just gave them to me in the beginning, and I denied it. And then when you look at 10 years, I'm like, okay, I don't fuck all the altcoins and all that stuff.
That's what I was going to say.
I don't give a shit about
but
that.
Is there a risk in? But here's the question about Bitcoin: is there a risk in having that be the standard? Like, why can't there be competing cryptocurrencies? Like, why are we so? Do we have to get committed to one? And if we do get committed to one, is there the possibility of some sort of manipulation, similar to what we've seen with all the other currencies?
Well,
when people get involved,
yeah,
money.
10 years of data have shown that Bitcoin really is the only one that you can trust.
Right.
Now it does.
Really? Is that true?
Yeah.
I just said right for no reason.
Yeah. The
Other
way
than
I
it seems
see
like
it.
a
Yeah.
bull
The
thing
way I see it. That's really the only one that you cannot manipulate, and all of the other coins are based off of it.
Do you know Andreas Antonopoulos? Brilliant.
I know Max Kaiser.
Okay. Sure, I've seen his videos.
Max
Yeah.
is. I've learned a lot, and Max has been saying this from day one. Anyway, we have enough historical information to see that but that is increasing in value no matter what you look at. The U.S. dollar, back when $5,000 truck in the 70s, $50,000 now, that value of that dollar has diminished by 10%. Because more people want money.
Let's start with a quick poll here. How many of you have used a digital currency like Bitcoin at least once? And how many of you own Bitcoin at this moment? Or any other digital currency? Okay. We can fix that. If you like, later on today, come find me. I would be delighted to demonstrate to you how to set up a Bitcoin wallet on your smartphone. And I will give you your first fraction of a Bitcoin, not a whole Bitcoin, and show you how a transaction works. Because Bitcoin and the digital currency revolution it has started is best demonstrated and experienced than explained. It's actually very difficult to explain Bitcoin. I've spent the last 5 years learning how to explain Bitcoin. That is my full-time job. Unfortunately, the developers keep making new stuff, which I then have to explain all over again. So, for a moment, forget everything you think you know about Bitcoin. Forget everything you've heard about blockchain, and let's start from basics. In 2011, I heard about Bitcoin for the first time. And my reaction was exactly the same as the reaction of everybody else who heard about Bitcoin the first time, including its founder. And that reaction was, ha! Nerd money. That's probably just for gambling. 6 months later, I heard about Bitcoin again. And this time, I read the white paper that launched this system. And my background in computer science and distributed systems allowed me to see behind the illusion of what I thought Bitcoin was, and it blew my mind. In my life, I have now had 6 occasions in which I have become absolutely obsessed with a system of technology to the point of forgetting to eat, forgetting to sleep, and consuming as much knowledge as I possibly can. My first computer when I was 10 years old, my first programming language experience, my first modem, my first access to the web, the first time I used the web browser, the first time I downloaded and installed the Linux operating system, and then when I discovered it, I spent 4 months consuming as much as I could, except food. I lost 26 pounds on the highly inadvisable diet of obsession. I have not emerged from that because I keep finding new layers of depth to understand this. And the reason it's so fascinating is because it isn't what it appears to be at first glance. Bitcoin isn't money. The blockchain isn't a system of currency. It is a platform of trust. It's not a company. It's not a product. It's not a service you sign up for. It's not a currency. Currency is just the first application. It is the concept of decentralization applied to the human communication of value. Because what is money? InQ told us it's an illusion. It's imaginary. And the reason we don't grasp that is because it's so deeply embedded in our civilization. Money is one of the oldest technologies that humanity has. It precedes writing. How do we know that? The very first samples of writing we have are spreadsheets. They are tallies and ledgers of debts owed, and money pre-existed that writing. You might even speculate that money had an oral tradition until it needed to invent a written tradition, so writing was created for it. In the history of money that now spans tens of thousands of years, there have been maybe 5 major changes. From pure barter exchange to the introduction of the first abstraction of value, shells, feathers, beads, nuts, stones, and then precious metals, and then paper money, and then plastic money, and now network money. Bitcoin introduces a platform on which you can run currency as an application on a network without any central points of control, a system completely decentralized like the internet itself. It is not money for the internet, but the internet of money. And what is money? Money is a language. Money is a linguistic abstraction. Money is a language that we use to communicate value to each other. Money simply allows us to express value, and that value may have economic consequences, but it also has other consequences. We use money to express and create social bonds and relationships and associations and to create organization. Bitcoin is the first system of money that is not controlled by any entity, that is completely decentralized. And what that does is it introduces the very same things that the internet brought to communication. other media, and you make it pure speech, pure content, an internet content type, a protocol designation, money over IP, it completely separates it from all of these previous notions of nations, sovereign issuers, institutions that control. And so we go from institution-based money to network-based money. And of course, everyone will welcome this with open arms. Not a chance. What do you think they said the first time someone was presented with a gold depository certificate instead of a gold coin? They said, that's not money. Go away. What do you think happened in 1950 the first time someone showed up at a motel and presented their Diners Club membership card and said, I'll pay with this piece of paper? That's not money. Go away. And now we're on the verge of a new transformation of money. We're on the verge of creating the first completely global, completely borderless, completely decentralized, and completely open form of money. One where you can build applications because this money is programmable. And you don't need to ask anyone's permission to launch an application any more than you need to ask permission to launch an application on the internet. And the only requirement to have a successful application on the Internet of Money is 2 interested participants. That is your market segment, and you have an application. And 1 million applications will flourish. When you push innovation to the edges of the network, when you remove the requirement for permission, what happens? Exponential explosion in innovation. The applications that could not be built on the old systems of money because they required permission, because they required a significantly large market segment, because they required adoption by many in order to be available at all. Now, none of those requirements exist. Anyone in the world can download an application or use even a feature phone with text messaging and immediately acquire the same powers that institutions of banking have today.
Do you have double cash apps?
No.
Maybe we should take it. It's
no,
open. It's free
no.
now.
One of our like equivalent operating principles within Cash and Square is how do we understand someone's struggle? Like how do we understand, how do we have the empathy for what they're struggling with? And when it comes to finance, they're struggling with a lot.
Yeah.
Typically they're struggling with a ton.
What was the thought process with, one of the things that's kind of cool about the Cash App is that you can buy and sell Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Are you guys going to consider other forms of cryptocurrency as well?
Not right now. So back to the internet, I believe the internet will have a native currency.
Really?
It'll have a native currency, and I don't know if it's Bitcoin. I think it will, because just given all the tests it's been through and the principles behind it, how it was created, and it was something that was born on the internet, that was developed on the internet, that it was tested on the internet. It is of the internet, and the reason we enabled the purchasing of Bitcoin within the Cash App is, one, we want to learn about the technology, and we want to put ourselves out there and take some risk. We're the first publicly traded company to actually offer it as a service. We're the first publicly traded company to talk to the SEC about Bitcoin and what that means. And it made us uncomfortable. We had to really understand what was going on, and that was critical and important. And then the second thing is that we would love to see something become a global currency. It enables more access. It allows us to serve more people. It allows us to move much faster around the world. And we thought we were going to start with how you can use it transactionally, but we noticed that people we're treating it more like an asset, like a virtual gold, and we wanted just to make that easy, like just the simplest way to buy and sell Bitcoin. But we also knew that it had to come with a lot of education. It had to come with constraint because, 2 years ago, people did some really unhealthy things about, purchasing Bitcoin. They maxed out their credit cards and put all their life savings into Bitcoin. So we developed some very simple restrictions and constraints, like you can't buy Bitcoin on the Cash App with a credit card. It has to be the money you actually have in it. And we look for day trading, which we discourage and shut down. Like that's not what we were trying to build. That's not what we were trying to optimize for. We made a children's book explaining what Bitcoin is and where it came from and how people use it and where it might be going. So we really tried to take on the role of education and to have some very simple, healthy constraints that allowed people to consider what their actions are in the space.
Now, when you have something like the Cash App, which is it's very much a disruptive technology in terms of decentralization of banks and currency, and to have it where everything is going right at, you're direct depositing a paycheck right in the app if you so choose. And then you could also buy Bitcoin, which is another disruptive technology. This is another step towards this sort of new way of doing things.
Yeah.
And is there pushback from any companies, or is there?
Oh yeah. I mean, you just look at some of the major banks and their consideration around Bitcoin. They all love blockchain because of the efficiencies it can create for their business and potentially new business lines. But I think there is a...
Explain blockchain for people who don't know what we're talking about.
Blockchain is a distributed ledger, and what that means is that it's basically a distributed database where the source of truth can be verified at any point around the network. And you can see, this annotation around how content or how around money traveled.
So you don't have to go to an institution to get the records.
There's no centralized check. There's no centralized control over it. And I think that is threatening. It's certainly threatening to certain services behind banks and financial institutions. It's threatening to some governments as well. So I just look at this and how do we embrace this technology, not react to it in more from a threat standpoint, but what does it enable us to do, and where does our value shift? And that's what we should be talking about right now, is how our value shifts. And there's always really strong answers to that question, but if you're not willing to ask the question in the first place, you will become irrelevant, because technology will just continue to march on and make you irrelevant. And it's the people that are growing up with this technology, or born with the technology, only knowing that technology, or are asking the tough questions of themselves that are going to be super disruptive to their business, and they're thinking about it right now, and they're taking actions. And we're doing that at Square, and we're doing that at Twitter, and that to me represents longevity. That represents our ability to thrive, and we got to push ourselves. We got to make ourselves uncomfortable, and we got to disrupt what we held sacred and what we think is success in it. Because otherwise, it's not going to be bigger than what we have to do.
Somebody saying, hey, all of you guys, let all these guys go at it. Let them just figure it out. Let them put it all together. Let them figure out all the mistakes. Let guys screw the whole thing up. And then 5 years, 10 years later, the world government, the governments come over and take over, and they centralize, and they say, listen, guys, thank you so much for all your help, but now we're going to take it over. So is it really the people doing it, or there's some people more powerful than you and I that are behind this?
Right, so a couple of things there. First of all, the idea of taking over Bitcoin is you have to kind of dig into that and understand what those words are implying. So to take over, we'll get to that in a second, but let's go back to kind of in a broader context here. So who created it, and why did they create it? The history of Bitcoin before the 2009 beginning of it, January 3rd of 2009, there's a 20-year history behind it of what are called the cypherpunks, and these are developers, programmers, hackers who were always trying to figure out what we call digital scarcity. And I myself have a patent on digital scarcity, U.S. patent 5950176. It's the virtual specialist technology. That is a patent that covers digital scarcity, as well as it's the first commercial prediction market. So the prediction market industry was pretty much, I invented that in 1996. And digital scarcity is this idea that can you create assets digitally that are scarce in a world of the internet where everything is basically easily to replicate. You know, what we know about the internet is that it's very easy to copy things. That's what makes the internet the internet. You can send emails to 10,000 people at a click of a mouse because it's easy to copy everything. And you create scarcity, digital scarcity. And so I know from experience from my patent and my work at the Hollywood Stock Exchange, which I created in 1996. We eventually sold that to Cantor Fitzgerald in 2001. But I know from my work in this space, the difficulty it was to come up with a decentralized digital scarcity, which is what Bitcoin accomplishes. Unlike every other attempt, is a centralized digital scarcity, and that's not the same thing. So that's the first point. The second point, in terms of can it be taken over, the fact is that the Bitcoin network runs at 120 quintillion calculations per second right now. To give you an idea of how big a number that is, if you were to add up every grain of sand on every beach in the world, it's about 7 quintillion. So Bitcoin's running at 120 quintillion calculations per second. It's the biggest distributed computer network ever in history, and the cost of taking it over is beyond the reach of any government. And it's beyond the reach of any group of governments. There is no entity or group of entities that have the computer power or the money to attack Bitcoin in any meaningful way, which makes it indestructible, immutable, uncensorable, and unconfiscatable as well, which is an attribute that a lot of people are waking up to, because it's not the same with gold. Gold is not unconfiscatable, and certainly fiat money is not unconfiscatable either.
All right, and then you said money. How is money going to change? How is money?
Well, poor people don't have bank accounts, and so when they have an emergency, they want to borrow, save, it's very tough. Small transactions, the fees are just too high when you have banks and ATMs and all that. If we take the cell phone and just use digital currency, then you can have all those financial services. So 2 billion people who don't have any kind of bank account will have all sorts of innovative services, help them save, pay for education, and it requires a little bit of work getting the regulation right, getting the critical mass, getting people to trust it. But the magic of that cell phone with the right software means that people have banking, and that's really big for their lives. They can borrow when they need to. And
it's interesting because everyone has a cell phone.
Bitcoin is something that you've been interested in and supportive of. In fact, one can pay for a tour on Virgin Galactic up to the moon with Bitcoin. I think the Winklevoss twins have said that they would do exactly that. Do you think this is a currency that's really going to work eventually?
Well, I think it is working, and there will be other currencies like it that may be even better. But in the meantime, there's a big industry around Bitcoin. You know, people have made fortunes out of Bitcoin. Some people have lost money out of Bitcoin.
And so that's another reallocation of trillions of dollars. And then in financial services, you know, Chris talked about it earlier, but Bitcoin and things like it is the equivalent of the red pill. Okay? We are entering a completely world of uncharted water right now.
Have you made any investments in Bitcoin?
So, I mean, I personally, I own Bitcoin in my hedge fund. I own Bitcoin in my fund. I own Bitcoin in my private account. It is a huge deal. It's a huge, huge, huge deal. Because what you're talking about right now is for the next 3 to 5 years, an unbelievably better store of value. It is gold 2.0, right? The value of gold that hedges the world economy about $9 trillion, right? $1,300 an ounce, of which only $100 to $150 is the actual production value. So all the rest of it is imputed, where, Lena, you and I have decided that it's worth $1,300 an ounce. Well, guess what? I can do the same thing with Bitcoin, except now I can do it outside the purview of every single government. It's being used everywhere where you would think it would be used. Russia, Iran, Iraq, Egypt, Venezuela, Argentina, everywhere where you have currency pressure, everywhere where you want to basically shield your assets. And then after that, it'll probably become a payment mechanism. So in all of these three industries, you're talking about trillions of dollars up for grabs. Up for grabs, right? And it's just about trying something.
Right.
And taking a few months to understand what the opportunity is and then hit the scene. And I think that the cool thing is it's easier to know how to code. It's actually useful in a way where, you know, you can probably hack something together yourself. You can find folks. And so this is the time where people should be trying really big, crazy things.
That's a great way to end. Thank you so much, Mark.
Need to move money from place to place. The cost of doing so, the overhead, as you put it, makes me think, believe it or not, of Bitcoin, because some people have said, hey, Bitcoin is the answer to those problems. Are you a believer?
Well, Bitcoin is exciting because it shows how cheap it can be. Bitcoin is better than currency in that you don't have to be physically in the same place. And of course, for large transactions, currency can get pretty inconvenient. The customers we're talking about aren't trying to be anonymous. You know, they're willing to be known. So the Bitcoin technology is key, and you could add to it, or you could build a similar technology where there's enough attribution that people feel comfortable. This has nothing to do with terrorism or any type of money laundering.
If you ask what are the things where there's, you know, what's very charismatic and that people are not paying enough attention to, I think there are these pockets in biotech that I find like that. You know, the one other one that I've been looking at a lot more have been the cryptocurrencies, and while I'm skeptical of most of them, I do think people are a little bit are maybe underestimating Bitcoin. Specifically, because it's like a reserve form of money. It's like gold, and it's just a store of value. You don't actually need to use to make payments. And it's been, you know, there's about $70 billion worth of Bitcoin in the world. There's $9 trillion worth of gold, and if Bitcoin ends up being the cyber equivalent of gold, you know, it has a great potential left. So it's a very different kind of thing from what people in Silicon Valley normally focus on. Companies, not, you know, algorithms or protocols. But this may be one exception that's very underestimated.
Well, people question it, and I know there's been so much debate about Bitcoin, but they question it because what is it based on? I mean, you see that the dollar is based on, you know, the trust of the Treasury, the trust of the U.S. government. What is Bitcoin based on?
Well, the argument it's based on the security of the map, which tells you that it can never be diluted by a government. It can't be hacked, and it's a form of money that's absolutely that's secure in an absolute way. Of course, you could ask the same question about gold. That's why I used the gold analogy. You could say, what is gold based on? Why is gold valuable?
Well, it's a tangible asset, though. Gold.
It's a tangible asset, but it's also hard to mine. So if it was easy to mine gold, then it wouldn't be that valuable because we would just have way more gold. So Bitcoin is also, it's mineable like gold. It's hard to mine. It's actually harder to mine than gold. And so in that sense, it's more constrained. And so, yeah, there are a number of things that I think make it somewhat similar to gold. And then the question is just, does this become more widely?
And it's anonymous, right? I mean, that's one of the beauties of it. You can be anonymous using Bitcoin.
Yeah, it's half anonymous, half not. So it's again this intermediate thing. There's a question whether that's right or not, but it's a bearer instrument. So if you have the Bitcoin, if you know the key, you can go anywhere. Most of the time, most securities are registered, not bearer security. So it's a very unusual kind of a security.